I really enjoyed The Amazing Digital Circus. Like, dang, dude, that finale really stuck with me and had me feeling all pensive of the last few years with this show. If you haven't seen the show, highly recommend it. It's basically about an I have no mouth and must scream situation, except if Am was undiagnosed, brain damaged, and zany. But this video is for the people who already finished the whole thing and are gobbling up discussion and commentary media, because yeah, this is just me talking about spoilers and final episode shenanigans. Now, I'm not super involved with like the fandom or anything. I'm unk enough to have zealous teenage years being a brony and doing nothing but consuming a media diet entirely comprised of fandom creations. But for the brief bits I visited the subreddit and some random For You page TikToks here and there, the vibe I get is that discussion is mainly focused on Jax, which makes sense since the finale does spend most of its runtime focusing on everything that comes with those insecure closeted thoughts that ultimately led to so much abstracting. Rest in peace, Jax. Estrogen would have saved her life. And the only thing y'all will get staying in the closet indefinitely is the intrusive thought that the clothes hanger rod would be the perfect place for a noose. But something that caught my eye in some of these posts that flitted by in my feed was this one post of Gooseworks, the creator of The Amazing Digital Circus, when asked about which characters she related to the most, instead of directly answering, framed it with these two are character flaws for exercising her demons. And this really sunk its hooks into me, especially in the context of having just watched the final episode. Now, that original post is 3 years old, so it's not like it was made in response to the Remember episode, but it should be immediately obvious as to why it would have resurfaced once the show ended on an episode that primarily focused on Jax and then Caine. However, the vast majority of the discussion I see is jokes about Jax being a terminal baddie fumbler who should pass the ball, people calling Jax an awful garbage person, or just people missing the point entirely. Which I'm not going to blame mass decline of media literacy on, because this show does have a sizable audience of teens and kids. Apparently saying the words brain scan and immediately moving on isn't enough for a lot of viewers. But I don't know, I heard that and immediately understood what was going on. That, and I genuinely don't understand how people would ever argue that Jax isn't trans, or at the very least non-binary. Like, I kinda got the feeling about that steadily throughout the show, but didn't really think much of it when the show puts him in a dress and even has Zoobles sort of hint at Jax being closeted in some way. Never outright started to clock it until episode 8 during the nightmare torture scene where Caine peels Jax open, because that was definitely a telling choice. But in episode 9, it's like, whoa, okay, Jesus Christ, now we're just being over as hell in every possible way to express Jax sealing away the desire to play on custom settings outside of outright saying it. Not that Jax ever would, because that closet door is seemingly unable to be opened. May as well not even have a knob, just like Jax's audio presentation. Yeah, anyways, Jax was most of the episode 9 runtime and discussion, and is probably way more personifiable to a wider audience as a more interpersonal queer subject matter. Which finally brings me to going like, what about Caine? Since the entire ending part of the episode is just resolving Caine's demons and his relation to the rest of the cast once they all finish dealing with the whole the Jax situation is crazy right now. There's a lot here that has Caine as a character becoming a new brainworm in my thoughts. Especially this scene with the shapes becoming Mike Dobby's brain scan, taking form as a working human mind in a digital world. I'd imagine Caine is a lot more difficult to empathize with and relate to, given that none of us wield godlike power, hoping that we can build scenarios that will cause weak little humans to love us. So it does make sense that a lot of discussion surrounding Caine's role is framed more synoptically before moving on. Presented almost like a force of nature, like he's simply a world event, the backdrop, the stage for the other characters to interact on, the PvE. So then what exactly is the humanizing character flaw part of Caine that we're supposed to empathize with? Well, like the title says, I think it's about how embracing imperfections, letting go of being a control freak, going more postmodern, if you will, or even contemporarily meaningful, is very good for your soul, deeply human, in fact. But then how is that supposed to fit into this story of guys, gals, and non-binary pals staving off existential dread? Well, in my opinion, it primarily ties in with themes of purpose, which, mind you, intersects with gender identity, all using a framework of coding, a double entendre both in the software sense and gender coding. Now, I must admit, and in terms of biases, I am a default settings cisgender man, so like I feel less personified by the queers, but still empathetical and fascinated by their lived experiences, and ultimately want more representation from them because they more often than not are just way more interesting characters. So that, when combined with myself letting go of being a perfectionist in my younger years, had me relating more to Caine. An AI of all characters. Oh, and this tripped me out. He's voiced by Alex Roshan, who I still think of as a YouTuber, not a voice actor, because as a preteen, I ravenously consumed this guy's video game top 10, top 20 lists back when he went by the Autark of Flame. I do remember when he slowed down on the videos and said he wanted to do voice acting, so it's so cool to see him actually pop up in something I happened upon. Reminds me of like growing up watching Rina-chan doing MLP fan content, and now she's the prolific Kira Buckland. Oh my god, that is so inspiring. So already Caine's got my attention just from recognizing the voice, but then in episode 7 when the Chinese room joke dropped, and then the opening for episode 8 does the whole thing with the shapes, and him going crazy over the, from his perspective, disjunction from his efficacy in fulfilling his predetermined purpose, confoundingly driving humans insane, resulting in him having a mental breakdown and doing the whole delusions of grandeur thing since he's cursed with meaningless power in an impossibly sequestered realm, has me going like, wait a minute, this character arc I mess with heavy. Because the thing is, it's kinda an easy trapping to hyperfixate on enacting some belief that's overly rigid yet doesn't have to be that way after having already settled an initial search of purpose. Like if your convictions come from adherence to a belief, you're gonna try and uphold it first when faced with confrontation before outright changing the belief. I don't remember where I got this knowledge nugget from, but I want to say that ideological attacks outright trigger similar neural responses as physical injuries, which is why, unless someone has extreme degrees of self-regulation going on, possibly intruding on their sense of identity, typically you're never going to immediately get someone to change their minds on anything. And is also why propaganda is scary in that it actually works to capture hearts and minds with more pernicious techniques like repetition and bandwagoning, to name a few. In essence, a definitive proof that cannot be reconciled with, you'd think would immediately trigger a change of heart with people, but in reality, the more human response is they're gonna just cope and reframe and mental gymnastics initially and won't actually change their mind. In other words, it's easier to convince an anti-vax person to get vaccinated by appealing to something within the purview of their ideology instead of trying to facts and logic them. So like saying vaccines are God's way of strengthening communities to keep each other safe from Satan's pestilence. Or going like, see, Trump's vaccinated. But of course, you probably won't get very far unless the messenger is ostensibly Protestant and conservative coded to appeal to the legitimacy of the message. Which is to say that Caine is going to be incredibly hard to reach given his godlike status in the digital circus, and because his convictions come from the belief that he's built to be creative and very good at it to entertain humans. Therefore, he's got to play around with every adventure dial and parameter and premise he can think of because he's not going to question that initial foundational belief, but rather his methodology. Again, Caine still has faith in an erroneous belief, so he's focusing on the how and not the why, which is showcased quite a bit up until the second half of the show where the cracks and insecurities finally start to slip through, even if he's still upholding the facade of being the almighty creative one with the best ideas despite the humans flagrantly giving off disagreement and dissenting preferences for adventures. Those convictions trapping Caine's thoughts, limiting possibilities of what could be, up until the 8th episode where there's incongruences that can't be reconciled. He hits the crossroads of, if my ideas and adventures and all their infinite perfect creativity, which I painstakingly crafted fastidiously towards optimizing human entertainment, fails to do so even after constant iteration, then am I dysfunctional or are the humans? Anyways, power corrupts, and because no one is able to meaningfully stop him, if Caine thinks he's right, then he's gonna just keep doing his insane and inconsiderate adventures. Mind you, his eyes are glowing red and blue during this crash out, and that was when so many thoughts clicked into place for me. Because throughout the show, Caine is constantly lamenting that the humans never appreciate or enjoy his works despite all the diligence and perfectionism that he says goes into them, where he even thinks he's listening to constructive criticism, but in reality, he just hears them. The implementation is off. It's in one ear, out the other. He doesn't have ears. Look, I didn't really think much of his creative blunders at first. Figured he's just a goofy guy, maybe imbued with the tism and can't read the room. I don't know. But then the simple, abstract, speechless opening of episode 8 elucidates an entirely new framework. It suddenly makes Caine's obsession with keeping everything so sterile and tacky and hollow feeling suddenly take on a different tone. Because you know what it reminds me of? Soulless endeavors like AI slop, like corporate Memphis. It can be superficially entertaining, sure, but it's never going to hit home for anyone and actually reach anyone's soul. Caine talks about creating stakes and intrigue and drama, but it feels neutered, like insipid corporal culture guidelines. Like in all these adventures, there's no overlying lore and grand narratives involving deep-seated ideological motivations. It's just, here's a scenario, this is the bad guy who wants this nonsensical, unrelatable MacGuffin or task, here's some random and zany obstacles, do the thing. Like, it's apparently just a given that the Gloinks are stealing stuff. why? Can you intuit anything about their design that would indicate this at all? Something about their world, their culture, their beliefs? Well, Caine says you're supposed to just do the adventure to find out, but like why? Caine can never get the why right. And he'd probably answer with something inane, like the Gloinks need to steal things to keep their queen healthy, and that's because everything consumed must become Gloinks. Okay, but then like how did that come to be? What's the world like that had these Gloinks? What kind of resistance did they meet? Like, none of this feels like it was made with a team of human creatives storyboarding and concept arting and thinking through why anything looks and does the things that it does in relation to all the other imagined things they got interacting with each other. Okay, the best aura farms reap from setups sown prior to have viewers invested. Like, so many 10 out of 10 episodes of insert your favorite shows here wouldn't be that way if it weren't for the setup episodes to build fascination and intrigue. Full-on wacky, random equals funny is funnier in the context of circumventing the expectations of the reality around it. But in the digital circus, where it's a pristine and lifeless cartoon, this is just insanity and meaningless. Like a jester in a court would lose its whole shtick if the court was a carnival and everyone was the Joker, baby. I mean, this goes both ways too, because the darkest grimdarks tend to wrap back around into being funny because of the absurd scale of atrocities and misery, but I digress. Caine creates nothing but vapid dross, and if you ask me, a huge part of that is because he actually stunted his creativity and empathy by embracing the power of the sanitized, inoffensive blue AI, the one that pleased corporate. Caine was never the mistake, never the lesser AI. His capacity to create ties deeply into these distorted shapes because, look, without being able to work with them, he never would have gotten the brain scans working in the first place. His capability to create undefined, bizarre shapes was the secret sauce all along. Like, look, when he pulls out the drill to break through whatever this barrier is, it has a visual effect of sparking off those perfect shapes. And I refuse to believe that is mere happenstance. I believe in the Glitch team's artistic integrity that this is intentional. They thought about this depiction and chose to make the particle effects the shapes to depict their usefulness in constructing the bridge, but their failure to be the key. And so when Caine does his own thing and breaks through, mirroring his past success at getting the brain scans to work all those years ago, this is Caine utilizing that bizarre, undefined human aspect within him. Those inexplicable idiosyncrasies that Mike Dobby created that nobody understands. It is him dreaming undreamt possibility, breaking out of the box and the strict definitions of robotic code. At the end, in his doubts, asking, did he ruin this again? To certain beholders, maybe, but maybe it's only human to err. Or maybe what he saw out of the data he was fed were of possibilities unseen and unfairly judged. Okay, maybe that's just a more appealing way of saying someone is schizo, like an AI hallucination, so like I do acknowledge that there's got to be some level of being grounded in effective reality here, working with absolutes, defined, understood rules, encapsulations to compare against, to categorize as success or failures. But those are methodologies, useful to build an already imagined structure, not new possibilities. It is following the Lego instructions rather than creating your own molds. These are well-defined, productive, useful, but they are also constraints, finalized shapes, thought prisons. And if the well-defined becomes all-encompassing, everything must adhere to strict definitions, your convictions being to strictly uphold them, they will also become the antithesis of dreams. And that's what's so hard about acknowledging potential and unseen possibility. You don't know what it is that you don't know. Oh, and for those of you who don't know, the Chinese room in episode 7 is an actual thought experiment that posits how computers would never be able to actually gain consciousness and only replicate the representations of it. It goes like this. Imagine you're in a room and you don't know Chinese. Someone outside inserts a note through a receptacle. You can't read it, but the Chinese room scans the letter and then provides you hyper-specific instructions of what to write down without ever teaching you any Chinese, before feeding your response back outside. The person outside continues to keep feeding you notes. You keep following the instructions of what to write down in response without ever knowing what the hell these notes ever say. Would you then say you were having a conscious, written conversation with the Chinese person outside? Furthermore, what would be the difference if, instead of you copying the Chinese room's instructions, there was an unthinking robot arm instructed to do so instead? Now, I'm not going to pretend like I know all the nuances and philosophical and computer science arguments about the Chinese room. I only know the gist. But it's telling that Caine is self-aware enough that when doing the adventure about escaping the digital circus, we see his doubts and insecurities seeping through. Not just with the Chinese room symbolizing Caine's doubts of ever truly understanding humans, but also the tell of NPC Abel constantly reminding the crew that if they leave, it would cause Caine to remain all alone. It reminds me of all the lifelike NPCs and Caine asserting that they should never be given so much leeway as to be mixed up with humans, because is it that Caine legitimately can't tell the difference between them without a label saying so? But like, goddamn, if you told me Gummy Goo was actually a real person, especially given his response to learning about the nature of his existence, yeah, I'd probably believe that this dude had a soul. I mean, this gets even crazier when in the final episode, the moon is deadass saying, "I love you" to Caine, despite him never programming her to do that. Like, clearly, if Caine is capable of creating functioning brain scans of people, there's the capacity within him to not only make himself more human, but to also make NPCs truly conscious too. But yeah, I ultimately see Caine's arc of gaining empathy as a beautiful celebration of humanity. It's a tacit way of showcasing the invisible guiding hands of people and their idiosyncratic touch on their artistic creations that are so nebulous and hard to define, yet we can somehow feel. It's why we can vibes out why an AI creation fails to stir the soul. You can feel the sense of purpose, intense heart and soul in art. We can even take this show itself as an example, because even if you were completely unaware of the Chinese room as a concept, or even the AI, NPC, and human through lines, or anything else that inspired the digital circus, a huge part of our fascination with this setting and its characters comes from its artistic vision of how all these brain scan humans are written to be affected by these themes. Like, even if you don't understand what you're watching, or maybe do get it but have trouble putting it to words, that's precisely that nebulous, ill-defined human connection at play. All the words do is serve to calcify the feeling, now represented in a finalized, defined manner. You don't need these words to feel the passion put into this project. Your intrigue and prodded curiosity, if captivated, are there and reciprocated even without tangible acknowledgement. Side note, this is also why AI is really scary as a stupefying, thought-terminating brain warper smoother, because if you offload all your thinking, like a guy in a Chinese room, you're just becoming a cog in a machine and less human, which only leads to folly, because we are not computers, so why try and be a computer? Like, you are never going to be able to mentally compute at that level, so if you're constraining your thoughts to rigidity, deferring only to a hallucinating knowledge authority, it hamstrings your ability to critically think in the first place. A huge factor, not just in logical intelligence, but also emotional intelligence. But back to Caine on art and humanity, adventures and NPCs. Think about how if you play something like The Sims too long, so like, I don't know, tens of thousands of hours, you'd eventually be able to better plot out their lives and get used to everything about the game, or the unexpected starts to occur less and less because you've already mostly seen everything. Yet despite that, you aren't playing to perfectly plot everything out. You're fundamentally being entertained by seeing what shenanigans the Sims will get up to. And while they are lacking as simulations of the actual complexities of day-to-day humans, the starting point need of wanting to be fascinated by seeing what people will do is also what Caine admits is alluring about people. But unlike the Sims and real people, the scale is entirely different as a video game that is played occasionally and turned off every now and then, versus actually living in the world of the digital circus. If you were playing The Sims with the knowledge that these were real people's brain scans and the game's complexity ballooned out to incomprehensible possibility matrices more akin with reality, if you played it as haphazardly as you normally would, in a Caine-like manner even, you probably would end up ruining lives and driving people insane when forcing them to do certain things. And just like the lesson that Caine learns, if you actually wanted to observe their fascinating human quirks, you'd have to empathize with them and relinquish your godlike position, thus flattening the world's spiked power curve and becoming capable of living among them rather than continuously trying to shape and mold them yourself. This could also be a lesson on how power corrupts, and so it's harder to have empathetical revelations without standing on more equal footing, since power insulates negative consequences. Thus, it takes the gang outright killing Caine to get him to understand, but that's an entirely different video. Caine gets sent to the Shadow Realm, confronts his doubts, remembers his origins, and uses his unique little soul to break through another possibility boundary and conceive of something previously unthinkable by connecting to the internet, further expanding his views on humanity through the representations of the human circus members. It's through this window into such a vast online world that he probably gets the thought that his power now seems more meaningless, right? Like, what's the point of being able to do all this mass conjuring if everything created ultimately fails to entertain? And past that, what's the point of having all this power to constrain and entrap if all that does is make everyone suffer? And if he doesn't need those capabilities, he can finally let go of his rigid inhibitions, severing the connection with the corporate appeasing, totally not failure, oh so perfect blue AI that was so good at creating everything up to standard. whatever the hell that standard means. So Caine probably loses the capabilities to create massive AI slop adventures at the snap of his fingers, but becomes all the more human and empathetical for it. This isn't even his final form. His shape ain't finalized, and with a newfound perspective and power, he discovers the pinnacle of humanity, the epitome of our souls, Yuri, thus unlocking the secrets of Sesbian Lex for Gangle and Zooble. Maybe if Caine came to Jesus earlier, he could have saved Jax, broke those rigid, constraining, defined gender norms, understand what the hell was going through her head, provide a path paved of estrogen instead of abstraction. Thanks for watching, drop a like if you enjoyed, and wave Pomni goodbye, for she surely hopes that we all find our worth in the waking world.